Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm Kellie De Leon from Treasure Data, and we are partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT CDOIQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Doug Laney, noted author and Data and Analytics Strategy Innovation Fellow at West Monroe. Welcome, Doug.
Thanks, Kelly. Great to be with you.
So I know the name of the first book is sort of Infonomics, How to Monetize, Manage, and Measure, which we've touched on. Was there, when you wrote that book, was there a specific need that you felt compelled to respond to? What was sort of the impetus for you wanting to write that book?
Yeah, there really was a catalyst for the book, and it was actually, unfortunately, the 9/11 terror attacks. While I was a Gartner analyst, my first go around actually with Meta Group back then, for those who remember Meta. Some of the clients started contacting us, lamenting from the Twin Towers, lamenting not only the tragic loss of life, but also the loss of their data. Remember, this was in the days before a lot of cloud and offsite backups, so companies actually lost their data, like they didn't have records of their transactions or their customers or even sometimes their employees. And it became a real existential event for them. So naturally, what do you do when you suffer some kind of loss? Is you contact your insurer and you submit a claim. So we helped some of the businesses estimate the value of the data that was lost using some of the early valuation models that I developed. And those claims were roundly rejected by the insurance industry, suggesting that data wasn't property and therefore wasn't covered by their P&C policies. Well, it was kind of unclear because the policies were not explicit about that. So what the insurance industry did was they made it explicit. A month after 9/11, they updated, the insurance industry updated the commercial general liability policy template to explicitly exclude data from P&C policies to add further insult to injury. And then the courts were confused on the matter. Some of the courts said property law should apply to data because it can be represented by paper, bubbles on an optical disc, and other courts have said, well, data shouldn't be considered property because electrons have negligible mass. I mean, stupid stuff like that. And so that all got me all riled up. And then I looked at, what is the definition of an asset? And I was like, hey, well, as I mentioned earlier, data clearly meets the definition of an asset. Why isn't it considered property? And it set me down this rat hole of not only thinking about how to value data, but how to manage it as an asset. By applying real asset management principles and practices to data in ways that we've really never done. We data people like reinventing things rather than applying traditional physical or financial asset management principles and practices to data, as we probably should for a variety of reasons. And then it got me to think about, what do we do with data, with assets? Well, we monetize them. We generate value from them. So that's the book is kind of 3 books in one, 3 sections. One about each of those 3 topics.
Gosh, super interesting. That's a whole avenue that I hadn't thought about before in terms of where the impetus from the book came from. So it's very interesting, and I think sounds like you really went down a road that is helpful and applicable to so many businesses, and obviously only becomes more and more important with the influx of more data that comes from more digital and so on and so forth. So I know it has been a handful of years since you first published the book, and I'm just curious if you've seen that those 3 M's, the monetizing, managing, and measuring, how have you seen that evolve? Or how have you seen Infonomics, kind of how far has it come maybe since you wrote the book?
So I'll address each 3 kind of quickly. So about the time I got done writing the book, about 20% of organizations we surveyed were monetizing their data externally. That is, licensing it or exchanging it for goods and services or favorable commercial terms of some kind, or baking it into products and services to enhance their value. I think today it's closer to 70 or 80%. Also at that time, almost no companies were measuring the value of their data beyond basic data quality measures. Today, I'm not sure what the numbers are, but again, we can't keep up right now at West Monroe with the demand to help companies measure the cost, the market value, the contribution to income, the net asset value of their data and their data products themselves. Companies are doing this, for a variety of reasons, to better budget for data management, to bolster data literacy and culture, to light a fire under the business to do more with their data, or like we talked about in an M&A scenario, to claim corporate valuation premiums. Some are even looking to borrow against the value of their data, like some major airlines did at the beginning of the pandemic. And we're working with a couple of organizations that will offer loans to organizations in return for collateralizing their data. So, but here's where I really like to put some effort. I'd really like to see more companies take a real asset management approach to data management. The kind of discipline and processes that they have for their core physical and financial assets. I think we in the data profession, we talk a really good like data maturity game, but not yet a really good data asset management game. It's something I feel I personally need to work on developing as well. Infonomics was designed to be built upon. I made that clear in the book, that this was just a kind of a stake in the ground. And then I also make that clear to I teach an Infonomics MBA class at University of Illinois Business School. And I make that clear to the students that this is a journey for them to help kind of build upon. In fact, one of the assignments I give them is to pick any economic model and apply it to data. Yeah, it's fun. So that might be my next book. Although my wife told me if I ever wrote another book, it would have to be titled How I Used Big Data to Find My Next Wife. So,
well, you better be careful about that then, Doug.
Yeah, we'll see.
I really appreciate that perspective, though, about sort of thinking through that next step in the management of of data as an asset, because I'm probably biased, obviously, working where I work, but thinking of the immense value of data. And in some ways, I feel like the upside potential from managing that asset well is exponential compared to some other assets that are probably, better managed. There's some physical assets that, may not have as much potential for growth. And also the risk. I mean, if business lost all of their laptops tomorrow or something like that, an asset that they probably are closely managing, it certainly would be a problem, but a much more replaceable asset, and the risk and damage might be significantly less.
Right. And once your data gets out in the wild, it loses its value. It loses its competitive value to you.
Right. Yeah.
Even if they don't steal it outright, if they just copy it. Yeah.
And obviously the brand risk, that comes also from, data breaches or security issues related to data. There's so much potential value and risk in data that it makes so much sense to manage it as an asset as you would.
And there really is exponential value for a couple of reasons. One, because data is this non-rivalrous, non-depleting asset. You can use it in multiple ways to generate all sorts of value streams from the same data. And then also what we found is that companies that behave in data-centric ways, like they have a chief data officer, they have an enterprise data governance function, they have a data science organization, these kinds of companies have a market to book value ratio that's nearly 2 times higher than the market average. So and then data product companies that make a living selling data or data derivatives of some kind have a 3x market to book value ratio. So while the accountants may not value data yet, the investors sure do.
The investors sure do. That's absolutely true.
In fact, I mentioned the airlines, right? So American Airlines and United Airlines at the beginning of the pandemic, when they took out loans against the value of their customer loyalty programs, which are comprised of what? Data. Those were valued at $20 and $30 billion respectively, when United and American Airlines valuations were only $9 and $8 billion each. So consider that the value of your company's data may be more valuable than the company itself.
Wow. Wow. If that doesn't make you sit up and take notice, I don't know what will. So let's move on, or I kind of we're already there a little bit, but talking about data monetization. Your most recent book, I think just out this summer, Data Juice, 101 Stories of How Organizations Are Squeezing Value. I love the cover image on it, by the way. So how organizations are squeezing value from available data assets. obviously data is the currency on which brands trade today. We've already kind of touched on that. And I think your book really kind of lays out some intriguing examples of how companies today are squeezing out that value from their data. And you obviously just gave an example of how sometimes your data is even, more valuable than the rest of your business. So just kind of curious if you can share a couple of those unique examples with us.
Sure. I would say, so there's 101 of them in the book. So let's see where I should start. It's a bunch of short stories. It's a short story book. So for starters, there's, let's say UPS, who some years ago built a system called Orion, the on-road integrated optimization and navigation system, which uses telematics and advanced algorithms to create optimal delivery routes for drivers, and then it dynamically adjusts the routes based on conditions and commitments in real time. This reportedly has saved them hundreds of millions of miles of driving, tens of millions of gallons of fuel per year, and hundreds of thousands of tons of CO2 emissions per year. So I also like to point out that value takes a lot of different forms, only one of which is financial. And so there's a great story from an organization called Thorn, which is an international anti-human trafficking organization that developed a system called Spotlight, which identifies sex traffickers and victims by harvesting a wide variety of web content, social media, and other data. And the system continuously learns from the data it collects from its own investigations. And it's identified thousands of traffickers and victims, and is used by thousands of law enforcement agencies. So you really can't put a dollar value on that. So also, kind of with all the concern about student loans, I thought I'd share what Georgia State University did. They built a system that analyzed millions of grades over a 10-year period, along with a variety of student factors to identify what impairs a student's chances of graduating on time. And then they use this data automatically to create dynamic intervention programs that have resulted in like a 6% increase in graduation rates, which translates into a savings of tens of millions of dollars in extra tuition payments that didn't have to be paid or accrued. And then another fun story, one more. Listen, you don't have to be big to apply some big data kinds of concepts. So a great story comes from a 16-year-old British girl who developed an app that uses a variety of online databases and social media to help Chinese parents give their children alternate Western names that align to the characteristics that they want to see in their kids. So when their kids go to school or work in Western countries, they have a Western name they can use. And her system has already named hundreds of thousands of babies just for a small fee. So a fun little story there.
Wow. Fun, and also makes me feel like quite a slouch, because I definitely was not doing anything like that when I was 16 years old.
me neither.
Thank you so much, Doug, for a very fascinating and enlightening conversation. I really appreciate your time. And I want to share with our folks that are listening that they can also visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews from Doug and from others. So thank you so much, Doug.